Hey everybody! Now we're going to look at another rhetorical analysis question. This one though is from a 20th century and after text. So it is a modern text and I want you to see it and to follow along as I go through the strategies and understand how they will be slightly different for a text that is not pre-modern. However, just to review, remember that what we are going to do first is to pre-write. We're going to pre-write when we read the prompt. And what we want to establish during pre-writing is first of all our thesis. That's required. Our thesis needs to be in response to the prompt question. We also want to decide on a loose organizational strategy that we can follow. We're going to decide both of those things before we even read the excerpt. After we read the excerpt, we are going to decide on our points that will be part of our thesis and that will make up our body paragraphs. So let's take a look at the prompt. So again, it says 40 minutes. We should always spend 40 minutes on these. And it says the passage below is from The Horizontal World, Deborah McCart's 2006 memoir about growing up in North Dakota. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze the strategies McCart uses, or McCourt, I don't know how to say her name. Apologies to the author. She uses to characterize the upper Midwest. So this is the author's purpose as designated in the prompt. So the author's purpose then is to characterize the upper Midwest. So to show the character of a place. And you need to decide the strategies she uses to do that. So our thesis would simply restate this last part of the prompt. So the author, and you should write out her name, she characterizes the upper Midwest in her 2006 memoir through her use of. So if you're in my classes, then you know the very first assignment that you did on your summer reading was your footnotes, and they were a style analysis, and you were tasked with, and we've done this many times throughout the year, articulating how the author achieves certain effects. So the effect here is a characterization of the Midwest. How does she achieve that? Now that's the first thing to consider. The second thing to consider, and this is going to play into our organizational strategy, is what is the character of the Midwest as presented in this text? So the challenge here would be, if you know anything about the Midwest, you don't want to fill in what you think about it. It needs to be according to the text. So we're going to determine what is the character of the Midwest and how does the author use language and rhetorical strategies to express that to a reader. Now, I would then start out thinking of a loose organizational structure in which I don't know yet how many sections I might have, but I do know that a basic block format would be, following my thesis, I'm going to first describe how the Midwest is characterized in this text, and then I'm going to describe how the author does that through rhetorical strategies. So let's begin. Driving west from Fargo on I-94, the freeway that cuts through the state of North Dakota, you'll encounter a road so lonely, treeless, and devoid of rises and curves in places that it will feel like one long-held pedal steel guitar note. If your tires are in proper alignment, you'll only need to tap your steering wheel to keep your car on a straight-ahead path. Now you are driving deep into the square states. This is the way I recently heard a comedian describe the column of states that holds down the center of the country, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, a region that spawns both tornadoes and Republicans. TV news anchors often hail from this part of the world, as do the most innocent female characters in movies and primetime TV dramas. Being blonde, fresh-faced, and Midwestern makes their descent into ruthless behavior in places like Los Angeles and New York all the more tragic. "We are the folks presidents talk to when times require," Sylvia Griffith Wheeler wrote in her poem Earthlings. "Networks make up women to look like us, who will not trade their bleaches, soaps, for anything." This is a region that contains both Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, and let's look down at our footnote, and it says that is a fictitious town in Keillor's radio show, A Prairie Home Companion, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average, and the Coen brothers, Fargo. And it says here under that footnote that Fargo is a 1996 film produced and directed by Joel and Ethan Coen. The macabre land of murder by wood chipper. Aside from this myth-making, the Midwest is a place that's been considered devoid of stories, a flyover region one must endure to get to more interesting places. Despite its easy inclines and farmable plains, the region was equally impressive to its earliest assessors. In the 1820s, Edwin James, the official chronicler of Major Stephen Long's survey, declared the region a dreary plain, wholly unfit for cultivation, and of course uninhabitable by a people depending upon agriculture for subsistence. It was Edwin James who dubbed the area between the Mississippi and the Rockies the Great American Desert, an indignity from which the region has struggled to recover ever since. This is the heartland, the place where Jefferson's idea of a rectangular cadastral survey, the land grid system outlined in the Land Ordinance of 1785, found its most perfect confluence of longitude, latitude, and countryside, so well behaved that it laid itself down in neat, even squares for the surveyors and instruments. Soon enough, as the surveying expedition moved west, the neatness of the grid was foiled by steep valleys, rivers, foothills, and mountains, but here in the monotonous square states, the survey subdivided the land easily into square upon square, each measuring 6 miles by 6 miles. What followed, Richard Manning observed in Grassland, a nonfiction book about the American prairie published in 1995, was a war on roots. The place was a mess, and it became a young nation's job to fix it with geometry, democracy, seeds, steam, steel, and water. Such is the situation all of my great-grandparents and grandparents encountered when they arrived between the years of 1885 and 1911. They traveled to the Midwest by train to what was then the end of the line, Eureka, South Dakota. Eureka, from the Greek word Heureka, meaning "I have found it," is reported to have been the word that Archimedes cried when he found a way to test the purity of Harrow's crown. My grandparents wouldn't have known the etymology of the word, but they would have felt it, the anticipation, as they waded along with the other immigrants from Russia to receive their allotments of land. Okay. Now, I wanted to use this one because a lot of the modern texts are deceptively simple. What do I mean by that? I mean, when we look at this, you understood probably 97% of the words and the meaning here. But how do we distill this into one thing to write about? Because the way that this text operates is by aggregate, meaning all of these pieces are collected together to create a collage or a portrait of this author's portrayal of the Midwest. And so it's hard to pick like a single thing to talk about or focus on. So that is the challenge of pre-writing to this one. We want to pick a few things that we feel that we can say a lot about. So my recommendations would be, first of all, to talk about how the author characterizes the Midwest as being misunderstood. So basically, with a question like this, can you come up with a single word or a single phrase in order to focus your response? So misunderstood is the umbrella under which everything else we talk about must fall. So the Midwest is misunderstood. Why? The Midwest is misunderstood. How? Okay? So let's go back to our thesis idea then. So we were going to restate the prompt. The prompt says, the author characterizes the upper Midwest as being misunderstood. Okay? So in her 2006 memoir, The Horizontal World, the author characterizes the Midwest as being misunderstood. How? Through her use of. And then I have to decide what I'm going to write about. Now, looking at it, I would say that there's a balance here between research and anecdotes and personal history. So let's look at, how about, instead of research, can I narrow that down a little bit more? Historical record, history. Okay, so the author characterizes the Midwest as being misunderstood through her use of anecdotal evidence, historical record, and personal experience. That's how she does it. Or that's what I'm going to choose to focus on. And I decide that before I draft. So just a reminder, and this is explained further in the first video on the rhetorical analysis. I pre-write, and then I draft. When I'm drafting, I just write according to my plan. When I am done drafting, I go back and I go to the top and I read what I wrote and I revise. When I revise, I'm revising to do what? To add to, where I need to develop further, to take away, where I go off topic, to rearrange, where I'm being disorganized, and to substitute, where I can come up with better word choice, better ideas. All right? Then when I'm done revising, I'm going to go to the top again. I'm going to read down for editing. And that is when I worry about spelling, grammar, punctuation, all of that stuff. Not sooner. Finally, polishing is the very last step. And in polishing, I'm going to look at, is there anything else that I need to fix? Give it a title. Any other little thing I need to do before I submit. So with 40 minutes, I should spend 10 minutes pre-writing. That includes reading the text. Okay? So I was able to do it, even talking you through it on this video, in 12 minutes. So you can do it in 10. 10 minutes pre-writing. Okay? 20 minutes drafting. So just writing according to my plan. I'm not stopping, I'm writing according to my plan. I'm completing the whole thing. Then I go to the top, and what am I going to do? I'm going to read through, and I'm going to revise for 5 minutes. I'm going to get to the bottom, and I'm going to go back to what I wrote, and I'm going to read through again from the top. And I'm going to edit and polish both in 5 minutes. So like 3 minutes for editing, 2 minutes for polishing. Because I don't want to be caught at the end when time is up, still writing. Got it? Okay, so before we look at the student responses, let's review what our thesis would be. So our thesis would be, one last time from the top. So how does the author, or analyze the strategies, how does the author characterize the upper Midwest? Okay, so in her 2006 memoir, The Horizontal World, the author characterizes the Midwest as being misunderstood through her use of anecdotal evidence, historical record, and personal experience. And I'm not going to write the essay for you, but just to kind of give you a little bit of the evidence that I would use with that thesis. So how is it misunderstood? Well, it's misunderstood, if you look over here, right? It's mischaracterized as being boring, as not having a whole lot of character, as being square, all these ideas. And so how does she characterize that it's misunderstood in that way? Well, I would quote from this part of the essay. See where my cursor is? TV news anchors hail from this part of the world, as do innocent female characters, right? So we know that no place includes only innocent people. All right, it's a place of myth making. It's misunderstood because it's presented in a way that's mythic, that's fictitious. Okay, it's unimpressive to its earliest assessors. So from here I can move on from these anecdotes from culture and from media into this historical record, which is my second point, right? So here is the historical record showing that these people found it unimpressive, it was dreary. The land survey supports that as well. And then Richard Manning. So there's 3 instances of historical record there that I could talk about. And then finally, she corrects the misunderstanding through what? Personal experience. Her great-grandparents. Okay? So through this anecdote, this personal experience, it reveals that this is a beloved place for the people who call it home. Okay? Now let's see how the students did. Okay, so this is the first essay that we have as a student response. These are all real student responses, by the way. You can find this document linked below and follow along on the screen as well. So this student wrote, hold on a moment. Okay. In this passage, Deborah Marquardt conveys her profound love for the upper Midwest region, even as it was dubbed an uninhabitable and plain location for many who first approached it. Through her use of allusions and diction to characterize the early region as unimpressive, she is able to convince her reader of unique qualities of the region that could not be found anywhere else. In her writing, she constantly alludes to writers and surveyors alike in order to describe special qualities of the region. For example, she refers to Sylvia Griffith Wheeler when she writes, "We are the folks presidents talk to when times require." She uses the allusion here to characterize her people as a natural heritage and of importance to America because presidents themselves find significance in their opinions. Also, she highlights the notion that citizens that hail from this region are among those that are most integral to the nation, showing her strong respect for the nation. However, the favorable qualities of the people are juxtaposed, that's a great word choice, to the barren features of the region, especially when she quotes Major Stephen Long as saying that it was a region uninhabitable by a people depending upon agriculture for subsistence. By juxtaposing the people that the environment produced with the environment itself, she slights those early assessors who believed that the upper Midwest was a region devoid of any favorable characteristics. Also, by introducing the idea that the region was first thought to be uninhabitable, she highlights her evident pride for those able to develop lifestyles there. She also utilizes diction to label the region first seen by surveyors and later by her own ancestors. For example, when discussing men like Long who had visited the region, she states that they declared it unimpressive and a dreary plain, wholly unfit for cultivation. Here she sets up the views of harsh critics of the region for comparison with her own feelings for the region itself. She goes on to introduce a story about her grandparents who felt anticipation when waiting to receive their land. By juxtaposing the unfavorable aspects of the land judged by surveyors with her grandparents' feeling of anticipation, she shows the reader how the land represented a new beginning for many Americans who disregarded the criticism of earlier assessors. She once again portrays her respect for the people of the upper Midwest by showing their ability to cultivate a previously labeled unimpressive land. Now, my first takeaway of this essay is this is a student who definitely writes better when they are warmed up, because the second half of this essay was by far stronger than the first half. It was more specific, it was more insightful. The last body paragraph and the conclusion, this student does a really good job of pulling in partial quotes to support their ideas like seamlessly. So the quotes are well integrated and really a part of the insight itself. They're not separate. So that was very strong. Let's see what the commenters had to say. So for this one, if you scroll down to the end of the document, you'll see the commentary. So for this sample, the student scored an 8. So remember that our scoring system has changed in 2020, but what AP is looking for is the same. So let's not worry about the number so much, but just know that this is like a B+. So this is a high pass. It's a good paper. And a score as high as an 8, that'll help even if a student didn't pass one of the other 3 exams in years where it is typical that you take all 3, except in 2020. There's only 1 essay due to the quarantines. So let's take a look at why this one did so well. So it says, this response effectively analyzes the strategies the author uses to characterize the Upper Midwest. The response opens with a statement of the central idea, and this little thing right here means spelling incorrect, by the way. So the author conveys her profound love for the Upper Midwest region, followed by a statement of intent to analyze diction and allusions in her characterization of the regions as one having unique qualities that could not be found anywhere else. So essentially, the scorers are saying there was a good, strong, and clear thesis. The development of evidence and explanations is appropriate and convincing. The second paragraph focuses on allusion with the opening comment. The author constantly alludes to writers and surveyors alike in order to describe special qualities of the region. The student provides examples and convincing commentary. By juxtaposing the people that the environment produced with the environment itself, she slights those early assessors who believed that the Upper Midwest was a region devoid of any favorable characteristics. The following paragraph focuses on the effects of the diction. She goes on to introduce a story about her grandparents who felt anticipation when waiting to receive the land. The response concludes with an insightful comment. She once again portrays her respect for the people of the Upper Midwest by showing their ability to cultivate a previously labeled unimpressive land. The student refers to the passage explicitly, and the language of the analysis is controlled and consistently effective. So the scorers agreed with my assessment that was an insightful conclusion and showed that this student can compose a college level response even on demand. So let's look at our second student example. So you need to scroll back up or follow along with me. Just make sure, whoops, I'm in the right spot. Okay. So this one says, the author characterizes the Upper Midwest as an entity whose landscape is bland and dull, yet very ordered and structured. She employs juxtaposition, varied diction, and reference to historical figures, impressions, to relay her characterization. Okay, I think that says impressions. The author utilizes juxtaposition to illustrate how the Upper Midwest is bland, orderly, and neat. She states, as the expedition moved west, the neatness of the grid was foiled by steep rivers, valleys, foothills, and mountains, but here in the monotonous square states. The juxtaposition of these two elements creates a stark contrast between the orderly and flat Midwest and the jagged and valley-filled states to the west. By creating such a stark contrast, she emphasizes the Upper Midwest's flat and almost something landscape. Her juxtaposition conjures images in flat squares compared to mountainous and majestic landscapes. She also juxtaposes how it was easy to subdivide the Midwestern states for the land ordinance of 1785, whereas the expedition was foiled by the difficult terrain of other states. This juxtaposition once again illustrates the neatness and structure of the Upper Midwest states. It is a land which is very readily and easily carved up compared to its western neighbors. Okay, I have to say something right here. So this paragraph is in dire need of revision. So, I mean, the ideas are good. So I'm not saying that this is not a passing essay, but this essay would be much improved if that student had taken the 5 minutes I've recommended for revising, because one of the things we do in revising is we eliminate repetitions. So when you're looking at the organization part, you need to eliminate where you repeat or go off topic. And in this paragraph right here, the student repeats a word choices over and over again. So let's look. Juxtaposition is mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4 times at least in one paragraph. That's too many times for any word. In addition, she repeats whole ideas again, like this closing sentence of this paragraph, it is a land which is very readily and easily carved up compared to its western neighbors. Look what it says right here. It says, it was easy to subdivide the Midwestern states for the land ordinance, whereas the expedition was foiled by the difficult terrain of other states. So that says the exact same thing that this does, and that's not good organization, because you don't need to go in a circle. So in my class we talk about how logic proceeds in a chain of reasoning, not a hula hoop. So I don't want to go round and round, right? So with this student, and I'm not criticizing the student, this happens normally when we're writing, and especially when we're writing on demand, so in drafts. That's why we have to go back. But a lot of times when you're writing in timed writing situations, you forget to go back or you run out of time. So if you were revising this essay, you would definitely take out those repetitions. But so make sure that you do that same thing even when you're writing with only 40 minutes. So what do you have to do? Give yourself the time to do it and plan on doing it and do it intentionally. All right. Another thing, this is missing transitions. So notice there's no transitional phrase or word here. The author also, well, there's also, but it doesn't work as effectively. There needs to be something here linking back up. The author also employs varied diction to depict the upper Midwest's bland landscape. She utilizes words such as lonely, treeless, and devoid of rises and curves, square states, flyover region that one must endure, easy inclines, and something plains. Such words and phrases evoke in the reader the image of the monotonous landscape of the upper Midwest. Her description characterizes the landscape as plain and dull, yet at the same time her diction depicts a landscape which is serene and very undaunting. So this is a nice insight right here. I do like this, but there's still that problem with repetition earlier with word choice. The upper Midwest has easy inclines and farmable plains. It's a place attractive to those who are farmers like her grandparents. She combines these different descriptions to characterize the upper Midwest as dull yet orderly. The use of the words flyover region which one must endure conveys an image of an utterly boring place. Okay, one thing I would ask is, well, why? And just to answer that question, it's in the use of the word endure. Because if you have to endure something, it's not something you enjoy, right? It's something you have to just suffer through. So, this implies that flyover region, that if you're in an airplane flying over this, there's really not much to look at that's any different. It's just kind of boring, is the imagery there. That's what's happening. So lastly, not the best transition either there. The author makes references to other people's impressions to characterize the upper Midwest as a land which many find uninteresting and unremarkable. She notes how the Midwest's assessors, such as James, declared the region as a dreary plain. This conjures images of an uninviting and dull region whose landscape is almost depressing. While she does acknowledge that the landscape is bland, she also shows how it is structured and orderly by making reference to the Land Ordinance of 1785. She notes how the upper Midwest was the heartland, the place where Jefferson's idea of a rectangular and something survey found its most perfect confluence of longitude, latitude. This characterization illuminates the landscape's neatness and evenness. That's also a nice comment. In conclusion, she characterizes the upper Midwest landscape as one which is bland and dull, yet neat and orderly at the same time through the use of juxtaposition, varied diction, and reference to others' opinions. So this isn't even really needed. She could have stopped here because this just really repeats the thesis, and you don't have to do that, and you shouldn't do that in AP level essays. So let's look at the scoring. Okay, so this got a 6, which is a pass, but it's like a C. So a 6 is not bad, but if you made a 6 and then, like, say you didn't do well on another one, you made a 4, you might not pass the exam. So we really want to aim for higher than this, but it got the job done. It is a C. So let's see why. Sorry about that. So this response adequately analyzes the strategies the author uses to characterize the upper Midwest. So adequate, that's that C word. The evidence for analysis clearly focuses on 3 strategies and describes the purpose. Juxtaposition to illustrate how the upper Midwest is bland, orderly, and neat. Diction to depict the upper Midwest's bland landscape, and references to other people's impressions to characterize the upper Midwest as a land which many find uninteresting and unremarkable. The explanations are appropriate and convincing, though at times repetitive. What did I tell you? Yes. Is that the student's fault? No. Why are they doing that? Because they had to write in only 40 minutes and read all of this and come up with the ideas. So give yourself 5 minutes to revise the essay, all right? And you won't have that problem. So without the repetition, this could have been a 7 or an 8, right? Easy fix. Repetitive. In the second paragraph, the student notes and sufficiently explains how landscapes or how the use of juxtaposition conjures images of flat squares compared to mountainous and majestic landscapes, and illustrates the neatness and structure of the upper Midwestern states. The third and fourth paragraphs continue with an adequate analysis of diction and of references. Although not as effective an analysis as those found in higher scoring essays, the response indicates a better understanding of the complexity of the passage than did lower scoring responses, and the prose is generally clear. So that kind of wording suggests that this almost didn't make it, but I guess compared to the others, it did okay. And I expect the reason why it looks like the scores on this one, on this year's administration of the exam, I haven't looked at it, but it sounds from the scoring commentary like students struggled with this one. And I think that goes back to my opening remarks on how some of these are deceptively simple. So probably students had a tough time deciding their focus. Because there's just a lot there. So really selecting that thesis intentionally in pre-writing is the key to that. Finally, let's look at our last sample of the rhetorical analysis. All right, so this student begins with something like a rhetorical précis, summarizing the text. In the horizontal world, the author expresses her ideas of the Midwest through a memory she recalls. Looks like they want this to go next. Encountering her piece, the reader is likely to reflect on her opinion of the Midwest due to her strategic rhetorical usage. Her characterization of the American Midwest is eloquently supported by the wide variety of rhetorical strategies such as anecdotes, analogies, and relative diction, which makes her piece extraordinarily developed. Okay, I'm worried for this student already. I haven't looked at the score, but I can tell this student probably can do a lot better than this when they're not writing on demand. But let me point out a couple things that are at issue here. There's a lot of vague phrasing that's made to sound sophisticated, but it doesn't really say a whole lot. Eloquently supported by wide variety of strategies. So wide is not the best adjective. So like what strategies? You need to be specific. Relative diction is not a thing. Relative to what? I think the student meant relatable. Relatable, a better way to say that is conversational. What the student observed, and the student is right, is that this memoir excerpt is easy to understand. It's accessible. I get it. I can envision it. So it's conversational. Now again, where could they fix this? Revision. Revision. That's where they could fix it. So give yourself 5 minutes to revise. Okay. Towards the opening of her piece, the author recalls an instantaneous event in which she was drifting along the North Dakota roads. The anecdote she includes grasps the reader's attention at the beginning of the piece due to its vibrant language and inclusion of author by the usage of the word you. Okay. Well, see, the student just made a mistake there. And this is another thing. I really think this student didn't pre-write. I think they have great ideas, but they didn't take the time to think about and crystallize what they are, because the author, when she says you, the author is not referring to the author. The author is referring to the reader. The author is referring to you or anyone reading the text. And what is that called? That's a direct address. And in the direct address, we feel closer to the author. As a reader, we feel closer to the subject. So I noticed the direct address as well, and that's something good to talk about, but you can't be wrong about it. You can't, if I say you, am I talking about me? No, I'm talking about you. So even if you don't remember terminology like direct address, you still need to be correct. So just saying the author invites the reader in through the use of the word you, through the use of the second person pronoun. Okay? Any of that would work, but this is wrong. She uses a metaphorical sentence to describe her path on the journey through the state when she says, if your tires path. This wasn't a great integration of the quote. This sentence figuratively describes the fact that there are many mountains by saying that the car will effortlessly go on its own with only a small movement. Instead of directly saying the physical state of North Dakota, her figurative anecdote triggers the reader's imagination of the view of the Midwest. Sounds like this student is really rushed here. This is not clear. So this is something that could be fixed in revision and then in editing, because there's some sentence fragments. It looks like incorrect word choice, effortlessly. I think it means she or he meant effortlessly. Okay, the author includes a small, that's not a necessary adjective, a small historical reference toward the middle of the passage, which she refers to again through an analogy. She states how the Midwest was before a dreary plain wholly unfit for cultivation, despite the fact that it had easy inclines and farmable plains. When the colonists had arrived, they also continuously described the Midwest as a land of squares, which they had ended up cultivating. She inserted an analogy in her piece and describes this effort of developing the Midwest by fixing it with geometry, seeds, steam, steel, and water. In her analogy, they fix the Midwest with these possessions as a way to show what the Midwest is really based on: a land of squares with cultivated plants and water to keep them healthy. Instead of literally saying what material things were exactly in the Midwest, she uses an analogy which really sophisticates her piece and makes it rhetorically mature whilst provoking the reader's mind. So, we don't want to end with a judgment, like saying how good the piece is. That's not the purpose, and there is always a tendency to do that, and that's not what you're being asked to do. The readers and the writers of the AP exam, the College Board, they already know that the piece they included on your test, that it is a good piece of writing. They didn't ask you to write a critique of it. They asked you to rhetorically analyze it. So you don't need to say how good it is. You need to say how she characterizes the Midwest. Sophisticates is not a verb. So there was that as well. And it sounds like this student was trying to write, this student was writing like imagining what their teacher would tell them to do in their own writing. But that's, again, keep your focus on the prompt. And I really think this student's probably a very strong writer. But on-demand writing requires a strategy, and that strategy is use the writing process on demand. Okay, let's look at what the commentators had to say. So the commentary for this one. Okay, so this essay made a 4. That is not passing. That is not passing, unfortunately. So the 4 is a D. Which is not considered a passing score on the AP exam. And it says, this response inadequately analyzes the strategies the author uses to characterize the Upper Midwest. The essay explains the intent to analyze strategies such as anecdotes, analogies, and relative diction, which makes her piece extraordinarily developed. The student discusses these strategies but generalizes rather than clearly analyzes. The anecdote she includes grasps the reader's attention at the beginning, spelling incorrect, of the piece due to its vibrant language and inclusion of author by the usage of the word you. The response includes less convincing explanations throughout. The prose generally conveys the student's ideas, but it is the insufficiency of the analysis. In her analogy, they fix the Midwest with these possessions as a way to show what the Midwest is really based on: a land of squares with cultivated plants and water to keep them healthy. That prevented this response from achieving a higher score. So again, I think this student got distracted. I think that in general, they're probably a strong writer, but they lacked the ability to write effectively on demand and to keep their ideas focused. So they definitely are capable and as capable as all of you are at accomplishing this effectively, but the key is in the writing process.